Bob Pollock is indeed on the line with us. Now, we're having a difficulty with one of our phone lines. I can dial out on it, but we're not getting calls in on it. So I called Bob on that line, and what that does is it leaves 349-WCCS open for you if you'd like to call in and ask Bob a question. 349-WCCS, that's 349-9227. All righty, it is Indiana in the Morning, and Bob brought to us by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you with us here today as we talk about thanks. And thanks for arranging to have Tom Bresnock on the air with us at 9:10 this morning. That should be interesting.
No problem. Glad to do it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about broadband and Penn State Extension's involvement in it with a number of different providers. So that'll be an interesting conversation. I wanted to ask you about pollinators today. And it's a cold, and it's going to be as cold this weekend as it's been all winter long. But the bees and the butterflies and everybody somehow is still going to come back. They're all going to come back in the spring, and they're going to make everything pretty again. Pollinators in the wintertime, how is it that they're able to survive as colonies like that? Of course, butterflies go south. What happens with the bees?
Well, depending on the type of bee, it may be the particular life stage it's in, which helps it survive the winter. Or in the case of like the honeybee, it's going to be in a hive, a maintained hive, and the heat from inside that hive, from all those bees in there, help keep that going.
Their metabolism must just be something to study when it gets into the winter months.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, because I'm sure there's some people studying that as well, in trying to figure out where that fits into the puzzle of some of the problems we're having, especially with the honeybee.
Yeah, the bee colony disorder that they note.
And where does that, the overall health, how important is it if you're stressed going into another stressful time? You're stressed from something else, and then you go into the winter where you can't get out and forage and gather food and all of that. It needs to be stored up in your body to survive. So if you're already stressed going into the fall by one or a number of things, how then does that will that affect the individual bee and its survivability to get through that winter time period?
Nature is such an amazing thing, and the way these creatures are able to adapt to their environments, and unfortunately the pests do as well. So you think about, all right, the spotted lanternfly, which has become the big one in recent years, but the emerald ash borer, another one. Those are insects that somehow they make it through a winter. We're seeing stink bugs again, and if we get a day when the sun shines, which admittedly is rare these days, but when the sun is shining, every once in a while you can see a stink bug crawling along somehow. They're waking up with this. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and more likely you're going to see those inside versus outside.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just because somehow they got in thinking that would be a better place it'd be a protected spot to overwinter in. And some insects will get, if they're overwintering in an adult stage, they may get down in stems of plants. And those might have been weeds, or they could be, native plants that have a hollow stem, and they die over the winter. The base, it's a perennial plant, herbaceous perennial plant, so the top dies down over the winter, but you've got stems or sticks there, and so insects can get down in that. They'll get underneath, up underneath the siding of your house, or, any places where there's little cavities or places where they can duck into. Some might spin a little bit of a silken cocoon, to help shield them from some of the conditions. Or just being in a crack or a crevice or up underneath the siding of the house can be just enough warmth that it gives them enough protection, and they've had enough food in their body, nourishment in there, that they can tap into that. And they're not being very active either. That's the other thing. They're settled down,
Yeah.
So their body functions are slowed down considerably, and so they're not needing near as much energy as what they would if they were flying and during the normal time when they're out searching for food.
Now, we're talking about pollinating bugs or insects right now, but and maybe some invasive ones as well. I wanted to ask you about the common wasp that we see all the time, because they also manage somehow to survive the winter. I've got them behind some of the shutters on my house, and I'm just wondering, do I get underneath those shutters and spray now, or do I wait until they become active again? Because in the summertime, around those black shutters, all of a sudden you'll look out and there'll be about 7 million of them flying around right outside the window at the shutter.
And so bees that make nests like that, the paper nests, whether they're the black wasps that make and they might have a mud nest built out of soil that they craft together, and then they'll attach that, and they might be behind a shutter. A lot of times you'll find them, you can look up and they'll be on a rafter, or, something like that, but just a surface that they can attach that mud to, and they'll have tubes there. And then also the bees that make and they might be wasps, and they might be yellow jackets, they might be hornets that make the paper nests. All those die. So any paper nest that you would see now, there's nothing in there, and it's safe to take those down and get those removed at this point.
And they leave their eggs then?
Yeah, only the queens overwinter. So you have that queen that will then in the spring start to lay eggs and start to process all over again. So you only have that one. All the workers and all that from the previous season, they're gone. And then the queen tries to survive over winter. And I don't know what the percentage rate of that is, but it's probably pretty good that those queens overwinter and start to process all over again the following spring.
She must be very lonely.
Yeah. I don't. I think she likes it that way. It's worked for them for eons.
Yeah, for all time, as a matter of fact. But it's interesting. You compare that to down south, where it is warm all year long in the southernmost portions of the United States, and we would assume then the life cycle is different there.
Yeah, it can be to a degree. They'll still go through those life stages, but they might do it for a shorter time. Or because it's warm, you might have a new queen that'll start a new nest and keep things going where that climate allows that to happen.
Okay. Just fascinating to me, and I'm sure it's very, very fascinating for those who are so fascinated they end up studying it. In fact, I'm reading online this morning about the honeybee overwintering and everything. It says as temperatures fall below 57 degrees, worker bees hunker down near their cache of honey and bee bread, and then you get into the cold of winter, and they're gone by then, and then the queen, she sits there all by herself, very, very sadly. We're talking to Bob Pollock this morning from...
You're assuming that she's very sad.
Well, hey, she's got internet. She's got everything she needs. This is what these conversations turn into when we get toward the end of winter and we're not into growing season yet, and I have to figure out a way to keep this segment going here.
Well, it is interesting to think about these things, because right now you'd be hard pressed and if you really needed something to do and get a little creative, you could go outside and start crawling around your house and look up underneath the edges of the framing and see what's there, if anything. You might find cocoons. That's another stage. So insects go through these different stages, but you might have eggs larvae, and then adults, or you might have eggs, larvae, pupa, and adults. And that pupal stage is how a lot of insects overwinter. So it's between that caterpillar and the adult moth stage, for instance. And that usually involves a cocoon. So it's transitioning from being that worm or caterpillar, and then in the spring, it'll complete that process. But right now, it would be covered usually with silk that caterpillar's spun, and then so it's a real protective coating. It's like insulation, and you'll find those. They might be they could be around the outside framework of a window, or again up underneath the siding, or any number of places like that are where they can get that silk to attach and it's protected. So oftentimes you can find those silken pupal cases. And then there's other ones. There's ground-dwelling bees that would overwinter in the soil. So they'll have little cavities in the soil, and they might be in the mulch. They get underneath that mulch layer where things are more consistent. The ground can still freeze, but it does that at a much slower rate. It comes into the ground, freezes slowly, and then it thaws slowly as well.
As thrilling as this conversation has been this morning, we're out of time.
We're going to have to end it.
We're out of time. He's Bob Pollock from the Extension Service. Hey, thanks for being with us this morning.
Hey, you're welcome.
Have a great day. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. 1 FM and AM 1160.